Greetings and welcome on behalf of Santa Clara University and the Silicon Valley Executive Center. My name is Dennis Lanham. I'm the Senior Assistant Dean of Executive Education here, and I head the Silicon Valley Executive Center here at the university. This is a very important series that Thane Kreiner and I have built in sort of collaboration with many initiatives that we are driving right now. Among the most important of them is the launch of a Black Corporate Board Readiness Program, which is going to launch next Thursday. We're very happy to announce that we have an overflowing cohort for our inaugural cohort of that program. And we really thought now is the time for us to really focus on issues around diversity in Silicon Valley. And so having built that program, we decided a webinar series with some of the most, I would say, profound and sort of thought-leading experts around diversity and the importance of diversity and how it can help to drive better business outcomes. We decided to pull together in this series. This is the third event in the series, and it's really focused on women in investing and women that have really built very successful careers in investing, and some of the challenges that have come along the way through the gender lens. And so we decided to go out, and Thane really knew many of the panelists and decided that this would be the perfect time to pull together this conversation, this critical conversation. So we have several of the programs. I'm happy to talk about those at the end of today's session, but for now, I want to turn it over to Thane Kreiner, who was really the visionary to pull this particular session together, and have him introduce Monique Aiken, who will be leading the panel discussion today. So Thane, over to you.
Thanks, Dennis. Well, it's really been an amazing journey over the last 8 months, co-creating the Black Corporate Board Readiness Program with Dennis, and not only the program, but the community that we've been building around it. And we are incredibly excited for the launch of the inaugural cohort next Thursday. There's 28 just fantastic, highly talented executives. The excuse that there's not a pipeline for diversity is totally blown away by this program. In parallel, as Dennis said, we really wanted to create a platform for authentic and important conversations on diversity in Silicon Valley. And I'm pausing there because the real question is, why aren't we doing so much better at diversity in Silicon Valley? We are supposed to be the most entrepreneurial and innovative ecosystem on the planet. But if you look at the statistics of who's in the venture capital, who's in the PE firms, who's leading the technology companies, who's in the boardrooms, it's way too white and it's way too male. So we can surely do better if we make a collective effort. On this journey, Dennis and I have had the good fortune to meet a number of incredible people who we didn't know before, in addition to engaging people from our own networks. Cami and Miriam and I go way, way back, but we had the good fortune to meet Melissa and our facilitator today, moderator, Monique Aiken. Monique is now managing director of the Investment Integration Project, and it focuses on systems level investing for pressing problems that are all interconnected, like racism, climate change, and income inequality. Monique is also a contributing editor at Impact Alpha, and we are delighted to welcome her and the panel today for this conversation on women in investing and how we can actually transform the system. So over to you, Monique, and thank you all for being with us.
And thank you for having me as part of this conversation. I think, as Dennis said, it's really important to be focusing on this at this particular time after the last 4 years that we collectively endured. And as we think forward, what do we need to learn and who do we need to learn it from? And also, what do we need to unlearn in this moment so that we can actually do things differently? I am honored to be joined by these three amazing women, trailblazers, each in their own right, for this conversation today, because the collective wisdom hopefully will inspire you as in your journeys, whoever it is listening here today. So with that, Melissa Bradley is part of this conversation. She's the founder of 1863 Ventures, among other things that she's done in her life. And in a second, we'll hear more from her about her path. We are also joined by Miriam Rivera, co-founder and managing partner of Ulu Ventures, and Camille Samuels, partner at Venrock. Apologies for stuttering over your name, but I will ask you, Melissa, to begin with, just sharing a little bit more about yourself, what you've done in the past, and one truth that you learned along your way.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be amongst an esteemed group. It's good to we all keep circling each other these days. So if anything positive has come out of the last couple of years is that the community has gotten tighter, and I get to see these friendly faces more often. So my pathway to get here is I'm a finance person. 2 + 2 is always 4. American history lies. Everything else changes. So I wanted to stick with what I knew I could master and manage and become successful. So I've always been interested in money, which is probably easy because I didn't have any when I was growing up. I went to school, was headed to Wall Street, it crashed, and I was like, wait, what am I going to do? And I decided to do entrepreneurship and had some pretty bad experiences in entering the capital markets and realized the day when the SBA told me they would not fund me because I was Black, I was a female, and they didn't know any successful folks in financial services, that I never wanted that to happen again. And so I set out to ultimately have an exit and become an angel investor. I did a venture capital fund, and now I run a bunch of accelerators. I run funds still, I sit on boards of funds. But that experience said to me that while I recognize my privilege, if that could happen to me, then I can only imagine how many other people it's happening to. And so it has become extremely important for me to be able to pay it forward and to democratize this access to capital and understanding finance, which honestly is not that complicated, but we have overcomplicated with language and scary. And we also have to recognize that the markets don't reflect reality. This whole GameStop conversation is absolutely positively a joke, and it does not reflect people's reality. So my entire focus has been, how do we make everyday finance relevant to folks so they can actually achieve economic prosperity? And I think the one truth is, as my kids tell me, I am all about Black. I am Black, I buy Black. I only, right now, since COVID, thank goodness, I only wear t-shirts by Black entrepreneurs. I only wear stuff by Black people, Black designers. And it's not just because I'm proud of the culture, but I recognize that because I have this privilege to be places, I want to re-emphasize and reinforce the signal effect that we are the new majority, not just numerically from a census perspective, but we lead culture. If you look at, I'm going to digress, if you look at the billion-dollar valuation of Clubhouse that is built on the backs of Black women, I think we got to own it. We got to own our power. And so I think that is the truth that I'm stepping in, that I don't care what anybody else says. I, as a Black woman, not Melissa Bradley, I, as a Black woman, am extremely powerful. And because I can walk, chew gum at the same time, I am going to use that to be able to help other people who look like me.
As I said, you all are going to be blown away by the rest of this conversation. I can only guarantee that. Hold on tight. So with that, Miriam, would you like to share a little bit more about yourself and how you got here, as well as one truth that you learned along your path, either about yourself or the system that we're all living in?
So Miriam Rivera, I'm the founder of Ulu Ventures, which is a seed stage enterprise IT venture capital fund located in Silicon Valley. I got here on a full scholarship going to Stanford, and I decided the weather agreed with me a lot more than Chicago, where I grew up. My family's originally from Puerto Rico, and I never understood why is it that I was born in upstate New York near Buffalo, lived in Chicago, and froze most of my life until college. So that's kind of part of my journey as a migrant across the United States. And I guess a truth that I learned about myself is that I learned how to change the messages that I allowed to enter my mind very early, because I got a lot of very negative messages, even in my own family, to be honest. I grew up in a home with a lot of domestic violence, physical abuse. And so as a child, you're learning a lot of messages from how you're treated by the people that are supposed to care for you. And I, had to learn that there were other messages I needed to let in. And I learned and appreciated over all these years that so much of the messages that people of color and women are getting are just actually designed to destroy you. And so part of your superpower has got to be to tune into that which inspires and helps you to grow and gives you the confidence to pursue the things that you want in life. And I learned that people would say, this is how you do something, and I would get there a completely different way. And so venture capital, for example, like Melissa, I came from a family where, my mom, who raised 5 of us with, at that time, less than 8th grade education, she never made more than $11,000 a year. So we didn't have money. But as Melissa says, I've learned that it's really, pretty much the basic math you get in elementary school: add, subtract, divide, et cetera, and multiply. And so most of that is accessible to many. And that this is a field that anyone can learn. Now, the other aspects of the job are, things like, can you build relationships with people? Can you actually articulate a vision that others want to be a part of? Those kinds of things that takes some individual work and vision. But the main thing I learned was that I needed to change messages, internal and external.
So appreciative of your vulnerability and sharing all of that with us. I think it's so powerful, the truth of how folks got to where they are, and the strength needed to get there. So we're going to get into that a little bit further in some very unique ways because of who you are and how you show up in the system and in the world. But before we do that, Cami, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. And thank you to both Melissa and Miriam for sharing what makes you you in a real way. I will build on what you said, Miriam. Sometimes an awkward childhood can yield to some important growth. I was functionally an orphan by 13. My dad died and my mom was an alcoholic. And you know what? Sometimes you can learn, well, I'm resilient from something like that, right? So I've been a venture capitalist now for 21 years. And in that intervening time, VC went from 4% women to 12%. So still terrible, but more women than there used to be, right? And I have a story from those early days that sort of illustrates what it was like. It's not a lot better, but it's a little better. So my very first interview at my very first job at 7:30 a.m. on Sand Hill Road, the guy interviewing me, who was a lion in the industry and also a dinosaur, was asking me about my background. And so he's like, so then what else did you do? And then what else did you do? And then I said, there's only so much career you can fit into a 28-year-old's life. And he said, 28? You're not going to up and get pregnant on me, are you? So anyway, the world does improve. I don't think that would happen today. And so slowly, surely, we're going to improve the world. And so then the truth that you asked for, Monique, my truth is that when I first got into venture, I was often in a board meeting, 18 people between the management team and the board, only women. And I quickly learned that while I'm naturally a brash New Yorker, that nobody wanted declarative statements out of a 28-year-old woman. And so I adjusted and I became sort of Socratic in my style. I would ask questions to sort of lead people to where I wanted them to get. And my truth is that I haven't adjusted. I'm still using those more cautious style, even though it wasn't originally my nature. And so I'm now seeing a coach to try to help me combine what was good about being a brash New Yorker and adapt to a world that is slowly, surely, one foot in front of the other, getting better.
Well, thank you also for your personal story. I think it resonates with so many people. So many of us have been through something, and more recently, since the pandemic, we're all going through who knows what. And many people are so close to tragedy, and we just have to honor that we've all come through a crucible to get where we are, no matter what, however high you've achieved to this point. And there's something specific, though, about women and some of the stories that you already mentioned. There's a common thread, at least among us, and certainly I'm sure others who are listening in, the sisterhood of first and onlys that are still happening. Janet Yellen, anyone, and any number of other people, new Madam Vice President, that is a bit disturbing and shocking. And we should be somewhat ashamed that these firsts are still happening while we celebrate them, because at least they're here. So as we think about this double-edged sword of first and onlyness that we have been through, we can celebrate the barrier broken, but then there's that burden of being the voice of your people, whoever people that is, whether it's women people, gay people, whatever, Latinx people, and both hyper visible as well as oddly invisible at times. And some of that has to do, like what you just mentioned, Cami, of having to edit yourself in some ways. I've echoed that experience starting in elementary school and certainly on the trading floor at various investment banks and other things like that. And even more recently in some of the smaller organizations I've joined, I'm the only one who looks like me, has hair like me. I stand out. I often find myself on websites after having gone to a conference or something because I'm the only one there. So I get to be the one that they take the picture of. So, I mean, it's laughable, but it's also, something that we should really think carefully about. And so as you think about being the first and only Miriam in your career, how has that been for you? And what are the ways that you've adjusted or really thought about, really being able to leverage that for good for yourself, as well as when has it maybe been a bit of a barrier?
Well, I have to say, I grew up in a time of, I think, great optimism. I'm probably a little older than some of the folks here. So I grew up kind of post-Civil Rights Act of 1964, Loving v. Virginia, 1964, Voting Rights Act of 65. And I feel like my life has been essentially a testament to the kinds of actions that led to those pieces of legislation and that enabled a life like mine to be possible. I also find that, I'm actually kind of disappointed when you say these things about the onlys. I remember being a girl growing up in the 70s, and we thought that the Equal Rights Amendment Act would not take until this last year or so to actually get the votes necessary to ratify it in the states that would be required for a constitutional amendment. And I would never have thought that it would take most of my entire life for something as basic as that to happen. And I've got two daughters, so I've really thought a lot about this. And on the one hand, the fact that there are people having very different lives because of that history. And on the other hand, how much slower it is than what I would have ever expected was possible, especially with women having, achieved so much in education. They exceed men in both college and master's level education in the country, and yet we're still found in such small numbers in so many professions. And so for me, I'd say it's been sometimes a very painful experience to be the only, and I kind of point people to a couple of movies because I think movies often speak to us and can share more than I could share in this talk. And there are a couple of them. One was 42 with Chadwick Boseman, where he plays Jackie Robinson. And then Men of Honor, where Cuba Gooding Jr. plays Carl Brashear, a master diver for the US Navy, and the first African-American to hold that role. And, these folks are taught so many lessons, like Jackie Robinson is basically told, you can never get angry no matter what happens. People are going to spit on you. They're going to throw things at you. Your own teammates are going to turn their backs on you. And so the lessons of being the first are very difficult because you're walking a fine line where on the one hand, you have to excel, and on the other hand, you also have to not repel further investment in people like you. And so I have found that to be a difficult path at times to navigate. But and like in Men of Honor, Carl Brashear is like literally underwater for almost 24 hours. They think his tank is probably got to be empty. He's going to be dead when they actually pull him up, but they don't bother to pull him up beforehand, and he stays there and somehow, and I've been a diver. So like the idea of being in the dark, in the cold, making that oxygen last as long as it can. And like you're literally in a tomb inside your own head because you're hearing your breath go in and out in the darkness. Like that movie to me just really spiritually talked about what it's like to be a one and only in a way that no one else could probably know. And I also note that I don't see a lot of movies about women like that. You know, where are we, the first and only women in our stories? Because I didn't learn about being a one and only from movies about women. I learned about them from people like Black people. So I would like to see a lot more representations of this one and only experience. And then at times it's also been like a tremendous revelation. At one point, I remember Google was about to go out for its second financing after its IPO public financing, and we were going to go raise like, I don't know, $3 billion or something. And I had come to work for the first, like majority of my career, I was dressed in navy, brown, charcoal, and Black clothing. And then I kind of got to be 40 and I decided I'm going to just like actually wear colors like this, which is what I wear, you know, bright colors, being Caribbean and so forth. And I came to work and I was wearing like this pink shirt and this skirt that had a print and was pink and white. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I've got a meeting with the investment bankers. And I realized at that point, like, wait, I'm the client. I get to hire them, you know, and all these guys come into the room with their blue, black, gray, and brown. And I just kind of laughed because it was the first time that being a one and only was actually kind of more fun than I was not the one on the other side of that table trying to get something, move ahead.
So powerful, and it really resonates with me because I spent most of my early career in investment banks wearing navy blue, gray, and Black. And I almost want to go change my sweater right now and take off this gray. But Cami, if you'd like to share next, you know, I have often joked with a friend, and we might do it now, start a group called the Onlys Club. I know early days for you, you were the only and first in a couple of situations that you're in. Can you just reflect for us a little bit on what that was like for you?
I will, Monique, although I will admit that when you sent out this question and I said, my goodness, I'm going to be on a panel with 3 African-American women and I'm going to complain about being an only. So I'm happy to admit that I was raised in guilt and I felt guilty at the notion about complaining about it. But what I will say is, as an example, I work at a place that I love, Venrock. It's been around for 51 years. It was originally kind of one of the white shoe venture capital firms. And when I joined the firm, there were 21 investment professionals. I was the only woman. There had been a woman who'd rotated in and out before, but I was the only woman and the first partner in the history of the firm. So, you know, that is just an example. And what I'll say is that today we're almost 30% women in the investment team, and my team is 60% women. So it can evolve and change. And you know, when I first, frankly, until 5-6 years ago, I had so many female friends in healthcare, which is the space I live in, who were CXOs, but not CEOs. They weren't replacing that X with an E. And in the last couple of years, that has started to change. And it's just a wonderful thing to see. And it's started to change. But I, to the extent that we have 191 people on this call, I just want to encourage all of you to don't put a limit as to where you're reaching.
Thank you for that, Cami. Melissa, let's hear from you about this question. I know that you also have a unique experience and vantage point, having worked in government and finance and in your own created spaces as an entrepreneur and founder of so many things. What's been the experience for you?
Yeah, I'm sitting here and I'm reading the chat. I love people's feedback. I think there is an excitement, enthusiasm that we're able to have this conversation around the challenges of oneness. I think Miriam nailed it. But there is something somewhat sad that in 2021, we're still talking about oneness. And it's funny because there's obviously a graphic going around of all the vice presidents, and then there's, you know, Kamala. And it's funny because I wanted to be in government when I was growing up. I wanted to be president of the United States. And my mom said, you can do it. And she bought me this map back in the day, and it had all the presidents. And I vividly remember sitting on the floor of our bedroom, and I was like, there's no Black people. And she's like, not yet. And, but it discouraged me. I was like, yeah, okay, forget that. And I remember like walking away from government and coming full circle when I had the privilege to serve under Obama. I took my mom, who's now 92, to meet him. And she said to him, I have waited all my life for you. And he said, thank you for waiting. And I share that because I think there is a deep sadness that we're still oneness, but at least we're not noneness. I think that we, the past several years, have said that we were running the risk of being extinct, of being completely etched out, of creating this new national narrative that all is well without diversity. So I think that in of itself says a lot. And unfortunately, after the past 4 years, I'll take the oneness. But I think what I'm hearing is an underlying theme for all of us, and we certainly talked about it on our pre-call, is that the oneness should not be the end, it's the beginning. And so if anybody right now is sitting in a place of oneness, then you need to knock down the door so that you are not the only one. I think we all had shared, but anytime I take a board seat, I still show up and I'm oftentimes the only woman, the only Black person, and oh my God, and the only Black female finance person. Whoa, jackpot. Because I help them check their diversity boxes with one candidate, right? I'm learning, and I know Miriam probably has the same thing. Like, I need Black, I need brown, I need female, I need finance. I'm not going to get 3 new board members. Let's just get me one. And I'm sure, like many of you, we've all gotten calls like, would you like to be on a board? I'm intent on making sure that when I leave, there's more than when I left. And I think that's probably what's most important. I'm unfortunately have become used to oneness. I've been the chair of boards. I sit on finance committees in government. But I always look around and say, okay, where can I put the next person so that we can move past that? And to me, that's really what's most important.
So you touched on something that I think is a perfect transition to this next series of questions I have related to readiness. You know, the board readiness conversation, given what Goldman has said, what the NASDAQ has said, I think is really going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because the groups that you are joining, if you are that woman or person of color, are they ready for you? And, you know, beyond the board level, just thinking about this concept of readiness to be the next version of yourself, who you need to be, hiring coaches to find your voice again, and thinking about all of those ways that, you know, there's a lot of roles that we play that we're not necessarily ready for until we start doing them. I'm a mom of a almost 2-year-old now, and I certainly wasn't ready for this. But as the poet Antonio Machado says, the path is literally made by walking, to paraphrase him. So in so many respects, our paths are made by walking. And so I'd just like to hear you all reflect really on readiness of others, of the investors, of the system, for you, for us. And maybe is there a different moment of now that readiness, you know, is not something that you even consider anymore? So Camille, if I could just ask you to reflect first on this concept of readiness. Love to hear from you.
Sure. And I was watching a couple of remarks in the chat. Someone mentioned that she had decided that her oneness was a form of PR, that people notice her. And I will say, you know, when everybody else is a sea of blue shirts on a white face, people are more likely to remember you. But let's make the most out of that memory. And I do think we're doing it for those that are coming after us, not just for ourselves. So in terms of the theme of readiness, one piece that has been fun for me and a bit of a privilege is that I long ago decided that I was going to be me as me. I wasn't going to try to be a dude anymore. And there are certain gifts that are attributed to women, and they're not always treated as gifts. So as recently as yesterday, so I work in early stage healthcare, and there were 4 of us on my team who'd been meeting with a young professor, an academic at Harvard who's from Canada, and the rest of my team, I'm surrounded by talented gunners, right? Very high energy people. really wanted to head towards pitching her and rushing her towards forming a company. And I had this strong intuition that she needed us to build trust and take more baby step approach towards it. And anyway, it was all sort of vindicated yesterday. And that believing in your intuition, that occasionally receiving as opposed to just sending information, and thinking about the humanity of the folks on the other side. Those are gifts that are often attributed to women and not always appreciated. And I've learned even that I can do it on Zoom. And there was also a remark in the chat around motherhood. We're actually all mothers on this panel. And I am unabashedly a mother. I have a special needs kid, and lots of people in the street know about it. And if I need to leave at 4 p.m. to go do something for one of my boys, so be it. Find environments. Not every environment will allow you to be you, but embrace the ones that do.
Thanks for that. And Miriam, I'll go to you next. In terms of this readiness question, I think you certainly batter down your fair share of barriers here. But in addition to that, what about the spaces that you've created for yourself as well? If you could add to that as well.
I do want to address the issue of being a mom at work, because I do feel like that was another area where I try to create space for other women. I was in a startup company as a co-founder that was angel-backed, then venture-backed. And at the Series B, the venture firm asked that I step down in order for that investment to be made, because they didn't want a husband and wife team. And my husband and I had a child while we were working at that startup. And I'd literally come to work with a broken pelvis for the last month of my pregnancy. I had my child on a Friday. I went back to work on a Monday. And I was asked to leave, and had board director who said, well, if it was my daughter, I'd want her to stay home with my child. And so the bad old days are the bad old days for a reason. I left, and of course, because it was in the best interest of the company to keep going. So my husband and I, we still stayed married after all of this. We're actually in partnership together at Ulu Ventures now. So better time, I think, for us to work together. But I want to say, like, when I got to Google, I was now the head of a team. And I remember putting into effect a policy that in our team, while the company might only have 3 months of paid leave, any parent could take up to 6 months of leave and plan on coming back to their job. And this was when we were the fastest growing company in the United States. So it was possible financially, but it was still a real strain in terms of like the amount of workload that we had to take in to support this kind of a policy. But what happened over time was that the company saw the data from that department that I founded and realized that when women were allowed up to 5 months of maternity leave, they did not have any greater attrition than men. And so, just having these kinds of lived experiences and being able to turn them into opportunities elsewhere in your career has been one of the benefits of being a first, or, I was probably the first woman that ever got founded, but definitely I feel like I was on the early side of husband and wife teams in Silicon Valley venture-backed companies. So I share that because it is about trying to create space. And I think this notion of inclusiveness that I want to add to this conversation, which is a lot of the times when we create a more inclusive environment for diverse people, we actually just create a better place for more people, and that we create businesses that are actually more effective and more profitable. So another example of that was hiring people from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds into Google Legal so that when we entered a market in another region of the world, we could have our attorneys like speaking, reading, and writing in Japanese, in Portuguese, in Spanish. And we just were faster to close deals than a lot of other people because of this diversity and inclusion that we had on our team. And so again, a lot of this was kind of overlooked in the story of like why Google is successful, but I own it because that inclusiveness came from having a different lived experience and an appreciation of how business really gets done in other cultures, and that you can just do business so much more effectively and quickly if you can actually talk people's language. So that's another way of creating space within the business world. And we can talk about creating space on a personal basis, but there are a lot of things that I think women and people of color do need, which is you do need to find people within your work environment that are going to be supportive, obviously, regardless of what color or gender they are. And then you're also going to need to have, it really does help to have white male friends and mentors and people that you can use as sounding boards. So do not kind of overlook that in your career. One of the most important pieces of advice I got at Google came from my white male boss from another company where I'd worked. I was being overlooked to actually go on the biggest deal of my career and the biggest deal of Google's life because it was going to happen over Easter weekend. And people thought, well, she's got a young kid, she probably won't want to come. And I kind of called different people. This white guy is like, just go in there and say, what flight should it be on? When are people arriving? So to work on this deal, because you're the head of the commercial function. Why wouldn't you be on the plane? And so, he just basically said, just act as if, or, live your authority that you actually have and go in there. And now this was a person of color that was my manager. He was an African-American man, but he also had stereotyping issues around like the fact that I was a young working mother. And as soon as I said that, he's like, oh, I didn't think you'd want to come. It's Easter and you have young kids. And I said, I am the head of the commercial function. And that's what I actually came to do here. And so after that, he never got in my way. But like, let me tell you, that was an experience where having white male friends, colleagues that I could really talk to and get advice from was pivotal to my career success, wealth and other things as well.
Thank you so much for those stories. And I think it just brings up for me that phrase that people say, business happens at the speed of trust. And the cultural capital is often discounted in lieu of prioritizing the actual financial capital. And it's a really brilliant story that really articulated it. And Melissa, let's hear from you on this question of readiness and thinking about ways that it shows up at the individual level, investors and systems. I know you've given this a lot of thought, so I'm curious to hear your stories.
I apologize. The sun is setting here in lovely DC, so I'm trying to manage the light. So sorry about that. I think I look at first of all, I love Miriam's story, and I think I look at readiness as two ways. I think I don't know many Black people that have not grown up hearing this saying, you have to be at least 100% better than everybody else. So I feel like every room I walk into, I am well overprepared because most people just show up, like they don't even think about showing up. They just assume they're going to be ready. So interesting enough, maybe a little bit of hubris, but certainly a lot of self-confidence. I don't worry about my being ready, but that's also because I'm doing the work, right? I'm reading, I'm researching, I'm prepared, I'm mindful, I take things seriously, and that's just the way that I was raised. Early on in my career, I was always very worried about everybody else thought. I would worry about what I wear, what my hair looked like, what I said, did I have the right pedigree? And I don't remember exactly. All I know was once I hit 50, I didn't give a hoot what everybody else thought. And I realized, I think some of that was age and just, building confidence in yourself. I think some of that was spending time in places and looking at my resume and looking at their resume, looking at what I was accomplishing, looking at what they was accomplishing. I was like, yeah, okay, we don't look the same, but clearly I'm doing a little bit more than you're doing. And so I do think that I had to realize that if I was too attached to how other people felt, I was being inauthentic to what my power and opportunity was in that moment. And I'm not always successful, but I try to be respectful, but I'm not going to be overly respectful and dishonest. And I think it came to not just trying to live black and white, left or right, but having levers around truth telling and levers around identity management and levers around no levers around intelligence, but levers around how I show up in being smart, levers around how I share my personal life, levers around how I integrate my social capital, and being mindful that not every situation is the same, and that I need to calibrate wherever I go, knowing that the end goal is I want to make sure that I'm able to have a positive impact and I'm able to bring other people in. And so sometimes I talk about my 6 kids, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I talk about my wife, sometimes I don't. But I never drop or crouch from the fact that I do actually understand finance, that I don't need a 101 primer on SPACs. I get it. I'm not going to hide that. I'm not going to hide the things that actually give me my competitive advantage. And I think part of that is because, as my kids joke, you are a consummate entrepreneur. And I'm not always sure that's a compliment, but I that's just my mind, right? I operate in my value is my competitive advantage. It's not something I should shy away from. And I operate in a world of I'm entering, but I'm representing everyone. And I think that's certainly something unique also probably for women and certainly for people of color, that you are hypersensitive of showing up. And so I'm always respectful, but I recognize, and my mom taught me this, wherever you show up, recognize you may never get invited again. And so make sure that when you have that moment, you use it, that if you don't get invited, at least somebody else does, or you use it to shift the stereotype they have about people for you. And so oftentimes I go to a meeting and they'll be talking about stuff and I'm like, I'm reading the room. I don't need to be the finance expert today. I need to be the Black woman expert today, or I need to be this expert. I need to be the kid expert today, or the parent expert today, or the whatever. And I think that's just part of, the code switching and the role switching and the wisdom switching. But I will say that hopefully something that everybody that's listening, the first thing we all have to do, whether we're female or people of color or both, is we have got to own and be comfortable with our power. My wife talks about superpowers all the time. And at first I was like, I love comics, but that's a little weird. But I think the greatest challenge is for ourselves owning our power. And I know, I'm sure, much like you and much like Miriam, and certainly like Cami, no matter for what reason we walk in a room, the power dynamic changes. And it is our responsibility and our right to make sure that it changes for the better, but not just for ourselves, for everybody else who's going to come behind us.
Thank you for those words of wisdom. It's deeply appreciated for me personally, and I'm sure I speak for others on this call too. So we're going to start answering some questions from the audience. So please prepare them as we get to our last prepared round of questions. So, start throwing them in the chat and I'll try and pick them out. And I'm sorry if we can't get to all of them. But so this next segment, I'd like to just really title it, If I Only Knew. So this is about what did you learn along the way or didn't listen to the first time until you had the lived experience. I think that's also something that we should flag because I'm sure I listen to my mother, but sometimes I don't. She told me when I was going into nonprofit that I needed to not end my sentences with a period, to your point a little earlier, Cami, about declarative statements and maybe of being a little bit too firm, but that was an asset when I was in investment banking and on the trading floor. And so at first, maybe a couple weeks, months, I didn't quite listen to it or didn't really kind of understand. And maybe it was on my side. That was the problem, user error. But for you, Miriam, let's go with you. Actually, I'm not sure if she's back.
She said her video has been turned off because of a technical glitch. So why don't
But you can go to the next person first.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. We'll get that sorted out. All right. How about you, Cami? What is one thing that you learned along the way or was told to you you didn't listen until you lived it a little bit?
So when I was a kid in college, a guy who's actually a journalist for the New Yorker now, a guy named Ken Aletta, had apparently gotten his first job out of one of the SUNY schools with my dad. And because my dad was dead, Ken wanted to mentor me a little. And he said to me, in life, there are buyers and there are sellers. And the closer you can be to a buyer, the better your life's going to be. Well, that meant nothing to an 18-year-old kid, nothing. And actually, it now provides me with two lessons. I actually think life is more interesting if you're both a buyer and a seller. It's harder for sure to be a seller, but I sell to my investors. I sell my companies to future investors. I have to sell to great entrepreneurs, but I'm also a buyer. And so that's the second theme is take advice, listen to it, but this advice is free and you get what you pay for in life. So just adopt what works for you.
That's good. Thank you for that. And Miriam, would you like to weigh in now on what was that advice that you wish you knew then?
Well, first, I wish that I had known that I would actually be okay at the end of things, right? Like I remember really having to treat so much of my life like it was a do or die decision, and like having to from, like when I was about high school age, I decided to take a scholarship at a boarding school and because people there went to college, but everything was just so heavy, like if I didn't have an A on this, it could be the end of my scholarship prospects. And there was so much pressure. And I wish I had known that, despite what everyone says, and I did a lot of the things, I checked a lot of the boxes, I got the right degrees, I got the right things, but I wish I'd known that everything wasn't going to be a do or die, and that even a person of color and a woman could make mistakes, end up having to go work around things, and it could work out because I think sometimes it's so fearful that if you don't, do everything right, if you're not the smartest and the most prepared person in the room, somehow you just won't make it. And, I remember at one point deciding that I would think the world was actually fair when mediocre people could actually make it in the world, and you just didn't have to be like twice as good and twice as fast. So for me, I needed to learn to actually breathe and enjoy life a bit more along the way, as opposed to making everything just so hard on myself, pressuring myself.
And Melissa, what was some of the one thing that you wish you knew?
Miriam had the amen corner around just making it safer to the other side. I think my biggest thing is pace yourself. When I was 20, I thought I had to do everything like in the next 3 to 5 years. And now, thank goodness I'm past that stage, and recognize that there is a reason and a season for everything. And I say that because this is not a marathon. This is like a marathon times 100. And so I think I had to come to terms with, I expect to see change in my lifetime, but I will not see all the change that I desire. And there was an element of humility in that. And so I think I had to stop being focused on what can I accomplish and flip it to what can I contribute. And so that there is a greater story for my kids and their kids and their kids. And I don't say that to sound hokey, because that is not who I am. But I realized the stuff that I'm trying to solve for is so much bigger than me. And it is taken me, and it takes a village. And so I think the other quick lesson is find the appropriate partners and allies. And there's a difference. A partner who's willing to stand by you side by side, has the same vision, goal, etc. And an ally is someone who may weave in and out, but is going to open doors and then keep on moving. They don't have to agree. They don't have to buy the whole story, but understanding that I needed to have this kind of cadre of, I'm mindful of using army and war tech analogy, but have this little cadre of people, right? My little Wakanda, of all shapes, ages, sizes, and races, who were going to help. And so I think that's it. I think patience and pacing, and then really building your Wakandan council or your community, because while I think women are great And I think Black and brown people are great. These systems, none of us can take down individually, and it definitely takes a village.
Thanks for those words of wisdom. We had a number of questions that have come in, and I'll start with the ones that are specifically related to investing in VC, since that was the point of this call and why we selected you in specific for your wisdom. But all of these words are really, to your point about silos, we are whole beings, and all of these affect who we are and actually also how we show up in the investment community. So one person asked, is there a singular moment or a career move that you made to get to where you are now in the venture capital space that is, instructive for some others? Maybe we'll start with you on this, Cami.
Sure. So I think if I was going to identify one thing I did that was helpful is I worked hard to have my first job out of graduate school, out of business school, be at a biotech company that had a world-class board, sort of had top VCs on it. And then I worked hard to impress them. And then, then in 2000, when money was sort of coming out of tech into healthcare, I was there. So it was sort of, I did network. I don't even think of networking as a dirty word. I think of it as, I like human beings. And getting to know human beings is good. But I did so in a way, it wasn't like, I'm going to go pick your brain, which is a really annoying way to approach someone. It was, I want to hear your story. There's subtle difference there, but it's an important one.
Miriam, would you like to share something about your pivot to get where you were now? I mean, you've had such an illustrious career.
It's interesting when you talk about networking. I would say that that's been one of the pivotal skills. I went to the Career Planning and Placement Center my first day at Stanford because I needed my work study job, and that's where the work study jobs were kind of housed on these little cards. And I remember seeing all this stuff about careers, resume writing, interviewing, information interviewing, which I didn't even know what that was at the time. And so I went up to the young woman at the counter. I said, do you guys ever hire people here? Because I think I have something to learn. And I was scared because I was going to borrow money to go to college. And she's like, oh, come right over, And so those folks, they took me under their wings. They made me do every single workshop in the whole career center and got, helped me understand the importance of internships and so forth. But the skill of networking and reaching out to people, like that is such a useful life skill. I used to have to do it by sending a physical letter and then calling the company and asking somebody if they would meet with me, which was really a long process. But I remember learning to train myself to do it by going through and making a certain number of calls until I got a good one, and then I quit for the day. I needed the positive of trying to sell and having a positive effect. And over time, for example, one of the pivotal jobs that I had was to work with a general counsel named Gabriel Sandoval, who was at Ureeka, which was a tech company in the Valley. And he was a first generation American, first generation college Latinx public company general counsel in his 30s. And I'm kind of like, oh my Lord, I've got to meet this human being, So I wrote the letter, said I was going to take him to lunch, please. And by the end of lunch, he basically hired me and had not let me pay for lunch. But and I had like 4 offers at that time. This was the go-go 90s. But I said I would work with him because I got things I need to learn from this guy. Mm-hmm. And that ended up being the playbook that led to Google, that led to a lot of other things like Ulu Ventures. So that skill, which is both networking and selling and, finding inspirational people for you to follow after, is a real life skill that helped me at every stage of my career. I did it with Ulu, I did it with Google Legal, and I would randomly, call people like the general counsel of McDonald's, you know, as we were like going international, and she would answer me and like answer questions about like how to avoid pitfalls in going international at a, you know, company that was just growing like crazy, like Google.
Powerful stuff. And Melissa, we'll ask you to kind of talk about your pivots into venture, particularly maybe after your time as administrations, and, you know, what were those kind of inflection points?
Yeah, you know, I've been in venture twice now, and kind of before the administration and after. And I would say I wasn't really looking to go into venture, to be honest. I wanted to just be on Wall Street. I just wanted to sit. I wanted to be Miriam. I just wanted to sit there, make some deals happen, make a good paycheck, and call it a day. And then realize that was not going to happen for a variety of reasons that were out of my control. And it really wasn't until I started my first business, when people kept telling me no, and then we did well, that I was like, these people that call themselves investors don't have a frigging clue on how to run a business. Like, they're just spraying and praying, and like, there's got to be a better way. And, you know, betting on this one unicorn is the dumbest thing ever. And so once I had some resources, I was like, well, I'm going to be an angel investor, and I'm going to figure this out. But it was really coming less from my finance side, but from an operator saying, you know, entrepreneurs need investors who actually understand the daggone journey, who can help them and be engaged and reduce friction and create scale. And that was my driver, because I didn't want any other entrepreneur to experience what I had gone through, which is not having any investors, but recognizing you need that foresight and realizing very quickly it's so not about the money. It is about the capital. It is about the community. It is about the camaraderie, but it's not about the capital when you actually get an investor, at least from my perspective. And so that angel investor became a venture capitalist. And then I would say, after spending time both in the Clinton administration and the Obama administrations, my sensitivity around the role of venture capital as an institutional asset class changed as I got more insight around policy and really began to, like, in my face, I already knew, but the challenges of the banking system and access to capital. And then it became much more professional. And so now, as a venture capitalist, I have a slightly different perspective, but still very much roll up your sleeve, hands-on. I'm in this with you. I'm a partner. Money is a means to an end. Let's talk about what you really need. And so that was really it. It was really out of frustration of not finding my own quote unquote investor or folks who could help me, but realizing, I think, as Miriam and Cami said, the value that investors play, which, let me just say, is so beyond the money. Because I think too many people are just doing it as like they're, I mean, I'm a gambler, but I think they're rolling dice, as opposed to saying, I'm really trying to build businesses that ultimately build communities.
Well, I think that's an important segue into one of the questions, was about the GameStop thing, which you referenced earlier. Would you share your opinion on that? Because I think this idea of stock market is gambling is an interesting one, and the dislocation of the real economy and people out of work and all these other things while we're hitting new highs. I'd just love to hear your reflection on that as an economist and an academic in some ways, you know, all of the ways that you show up in the world. Let's hear from you on this too, before we go to a couple more questions.
I think the biggest takeaway is that it has become, I mean, last year was clearly the case, but like, this is the epitome where the markets do not reflect reality. The markets do not reflect people's everyday life. And in my professorial role, I think, you know, there's a group of us that chat across the different universities, and it's a common theme. I think too often we have used these false indices as the proxy for what is a successful economy. And it's really not true. And so it's sad to say, but I actually laugh at this whole GameStop thing, but I realize it's not funny. It's not funny how such a small group of folks can really tip the scales and change the dynamics. And it's one of the reasons why I think I am oversensitive when people say I want to be an investor, because investing in people is not a gamble. Like, I go to Vegas and I gamble, but investing in companies, investing in entrepreneurs is not a gamble. And I think people, respectfully, with all the apps and everything, have made it seem too simple just to move money back and forth. But those markets make people's lives or break people's lives. And these false valuations, I mean, let's talk about Clubhouse, $1 billion valuation on the backs of Black women who are the primary users and drivers. And yet we get no economic value or derived profit. So I will say, as somebody who's a hardcore finance person, I have come to appreciate the markets for what they are, which is nothing more than a signal effect. I have come to understand they do not represent the economic well-being of most people in this country. If you have the privilege to use them and leverage them, then go for it, my friend. And if you want to be in business, you want to be an investor, you do need to understand how they work and how to manipulate them. But by no means should we use them as an indicator of the health or well-being of this country, for sure.
Miriam, you were nodding vigorously. Did you want to chime in on that?
Oh, I just, I think this year where there's been such a big disconnect between, Main Street and Wall Street, as people describe it, is just astounding. And that's also a factor, I think, for why diverse people are needed in places like venture capital, because there are a lot of people running around places like Wall Street and DC who have no firsthand experience of what life is like for the majority of Americans. And I think that having people of color, people who have had different economic backgrounds growing up, people who actually have relationships with people of different economic sectors, is just really important in order to be able to identify products and services that can really serve large numbers of Americans. So again, this is an area where the stock market is now the purview of day traders and people who are using economic policy and their relationships in DC to get all these advantages for themselves. And, they're literally taking money out of other programs that are needed for communities that are really hurting. And a lot of, the PPP is spent in the wrong places. And, I think that's so much more possible when you really don't have people that reflect the society we live in.
Cami, did you want to add some sprinkles to this last question?
What I can say is what I do is I have the honor of taking money from, endowments and foundations and putting it behind amazing entrepreneurs who hope to change the world in some way. And I do it at the very early stage. And, a great year for me is when I can identify a way that I've helped in a material way move that business along 6 times, right? You don't actually have the privilege to, hire a world-class board member or whatever it is, whatever way you help these companies. And that is so far from Wall Street. And yeah, my firm has a hedge fund and so on, but even my hedge fund partners aren't trying to predict what's going to happen 3 and 6 months now in the markets. And I think other than there's easy money, that easy money's not going into retail right now, GameStop notwithstanding. So instead it's going into tech and biotech, and those sectors are going nuts. And it's totally disassociated from reality.
Coming back to reality, and many people asked about just really granular questions around their careers. And so if you can share in the chat as we begin to, I have one last question. That'll be my formal question for all of you. But if you can share any resources, how to get started in VC or investing that you think will be useful, you could add some links, my fellow panelists. But before we turn it back to Dennis, let's have a lightning round of final thoughts from each one of you. And it could be a call to action. It could be this, a quote that you think about every day or a mantra that you use to center yourselves. Anything that you think that will be helpful for folks to sit with after we close the Zoom screen. Melissa, maybe we'll start with you here.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I use lots of quotes, and I usually post them on Twitter because I see things. I think I'm pulling up one now. I think the quote that I'm resonating with now, and probably because I'm using it with my kids, is whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. Period. Whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And so I've been following the chat, and I think the only thing I would say is I am impressed and humbled to see so many women who I think already have and are now ready to step up. I think, my mom is 92 years old, and she always says, if there was a moment for you to get all the stuff that you want to do around equality and equity, this is it. And not because there's something magical happen, but like, what are we waiting for, right? Martin Luther King said, why we can't wait. And so I think that's kind of my message or thing that I would say is that first and foremost, I'm here. People are hitting me up, and I'm here to help. I recognize a little bit of privilege that I have in this world, and I'm willing to share it. So if there's anything that I can do to anybody that's on this call, then let me know. And then second, don't wait. Be patient, but don't wait, because now is the time. I think we have, for better or for worse, maybe hopefully seen the worst of what's possible in this country. And as we make this pivot to hopefully something that's better, now's as good a time as any. I don't know the markets are going to get any better. I don't know that people are going to be less racist. I don't know that gender equity is going to get any better. I mean, we see moments, but there's still a lot of oneness. So don't wait till it's better. I'm optimistic, but just do it now.
Thanks for that. Cami, would you like to share yours?
One of my big themes, coming back to this idea that we were all super anxious when we were young, and I'm still super anxious, but I'm a little less so now. Do what you love. I overanalyze everything, and I believe that a B player who's passionate gets A+ outcomes, and an A player who has D passion doesn't. So do what you love and don't overanalyze it. And then I put in there my favorite quote, the Maya Angelou quote about how you make people feel. We operate in a business with a bunch of mostly men who need to always be the smartest person in the room, but don't just show your smarts, make people feel inspired. Entrepreneurs really need that. It's hard to pick yourself up and build a business.
Thank you. And Miriam, you got the last word before we turn it back to Dennis.
I would just say that for me, a lot of when I think about like my biggest successes, they have come from like just pursuing something that was interesting and idiosyncratically interesting to me. And a lot of our companies that have been really successful, it was about making an individual connection, human being to human being, and not like some great mystery, my great investment thesis and investing acumen. I like to think I have that, but really, like I've met some of the most interesting entrepreneurs at like somebody's house over dinner, and then they've said, hey, who was that woman that sat next to me at your dinner? And then they've come and talked to me more. And so I want to say that. And also that some things have come in the door because of like the willingness to help somebody think through an idea, like a project in a class even. And 2 years later, that idea is a company. And now, again, they're like, oh, you helped me think through this thing for my project. And we actually did something with that. And I want to talk to you about it. So a lot of the times what I have found is that it's this really building a positive relationship with somebody and building a sense of trust that has meant that they come back in my life again, and that I can be of help because I've earned a place for them in terms of somebody that they respect and think will give them, real and useful input.
Well, thank you to all of you for your words of wisdom, Melissa, Cami, and Miriam. I hope that all of you come back to my life sometimes in the future. And with that, Dennis, I think the mic is yours.
Wow. That may be the most incredible panel I've ever had the privilege of listening to. So thank you, all of you. I think vulnerability and leadership is really where people are able to transform. And the vulnerability that all of you exhibit today on this panel, I think has helped a lot of people, including me. So sincerest thank you to all four of you. I'll tell you, I had the privilege of getting to know all of you through the Black Corporate Board Readiness Program that we are set to launch next week in different ways. And I hadn't met any of you prior to that. And it's time for us to stop talking and to move toward action. Because we all have some level of authority, and it's our duty to use that platform, whatever it is, and how small or how big it may be, to create the world and to build the world that we all deserve to live in. And so thank you all from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate it. I do want to also give a special thank you to Thane Kreiner, who really was sort of the visionary behind building this panel and has put a lot of work into the building and the launching of the Black Corporate Board Readiness Program, which is modeled after the Women's Corporate Board Readiness Program that we built and launched of May of 19. I did that in collaboration with Teresa Strickland, who I don't think was able to make the panel today. So on behalf of SEU and on behalf of the Silicon Valley Executive Center, Warm wishes to you all. I'm hopeful to be able to see familiar faces moving forward with all of the initiatives that we have. The next session will be with, it will be a fireside chat with Darren Walker, who is the president of the Ford Foundation, and our university president, Kevin O'Brien. And so Father O'Brien and Darren will be talking about, at the systems level, what we should be doing to really move from tokenism when we think about diversity to true transformation, as Darren likes to say. So you're all invited. If you haven't registered, now's the time to register. It's filling up very quickly. But again, thank you all. This has been a true privilege, and we'll see you soon.